My name is SM Quartey. I'm the Principal Architect of Atelier and the President of the Ghana Institute of Architects. I'm here to have a conversation with Lema Academy on architecture and its impact on our society.
Can you kindly tell us who is an architect and why are they important?
The architect plans, designs and supervises buildings for habitation, or basically enclosures for human usage. I would say they are important because fundamentally God has created an environment for us, the world, the hills, the climate, etc. And then man ought to put up buildings and structures for habitation and other purposes. And the architect is that person trained to bring these things into fruition. So they are very important for our livelihood. Yeah.
What is the job of an architect? And why do people go to architectural firms as opposed to individual architects?
The architect would plan, he would design, he would see to the execution of his dreams for the client. And to the choice of going to an architect or an individual architect or a firm is really, sometimes it's more to do with the scale. Say if a project is of a certain size, it suggests that an individual might struggle with its execution. And so if it's a bigger firm, a firm has a collection of architects, so then they put together all their strengths to be able to execute that. But usually for most homes, it may not be so relevant as to whether you talk to an individual architect or to a firm. I think in my firm though, the advantage we get or we give our clients is that we put together our heads. So say if I was working on a scheme, I'll get the added advantage of some of my staff contributing and making input to make it all the more richer for my clients. If I was a single architect, I wouldn't have that kind of advantage. As well, individuals may possibly be indisposed at certain times and may not have the backup support if they're just an individual architect. Whereas in a firm, if say someone is indisposed, you could always count on others to come in to support. So a firm is probably more stable. Most corporate bodies though would generally deal with firms when they're doing their projects, but for residences and individuals, residences and things like sometimes it might not be wrong to deal with an individual architect.
What are the top 3 questions an individual must ask their architect before they start to build?
First, what have you done before? It's necessary to see what this architect has done so you can satisfy yourself if they speak that kind of language or the kind of response you want. I would also think that it is necessary to ask what are the deliverables. Often a client may have an expectation. I've had clients who think that maybe the architect is actually even going to do the construction because they possibly don't know the full scope of an architect's services. So you need to ask what exactly are you expecting in return for their services. I think as well if the whole design, the brief, if you can engage the architect and say, what do you also think about it? Because if you just go ahead to give your brief to the architect and then he also just does that for you, it possibly may have some lapses, some shortcomings. So he's a professional, you're trusting his judgment. Maybe you can ask him, is it okay to do all of that? Or what do you think as well? I think these are some 3 things it would be helpful to engage your architect on if you're starting a project. Yeah.
When an individual decides to build, what are the initial things they should consider?
The location, of course. Where do they want to build? What exactly do they want to do, as in the brief? And it's necessary to think about the cost of it as well. These are things that often people don't want to think about. Sometimes people don't even want to know the cost, but these things they must consider. Where do they want to build? Is that the best place for it? What do they want to do there? What's the brief? Is that the most appropriate brief for the project for that location? And then if they can also have a conversation about how much it's going to cost and how they're going to put together their funding for it.
If a potential client is building their first home, what type of structure would you advise them go for? And then how much should they budget for?
My first home, where I live now, is about a 6-bedroom home, but that's because my family was already a big size. I think that you must consider your family size in doing that home. So really, in terms of size, it will vary for everybody.
If a potential client is building their first home, and for example, they may be single, possibly under the age of 30, what type of structure would you advise them to go for?
They should be looking at possibly, if it's a 2-bedroom home, but that it has a flexibility of being expandable, so that as their family size increases, they could add on to the building. Also, that suggests that even the location of the building on the plot must be something done with that in mind, that one day they may want to expand the space. In terms of budget, it really varies, because it's the kind of finishes that you put into a building will dictate, but it possibly will be anything around $50,000 or something like that to be able to do something like that.
And would that include finishings?
That would include finishing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what if the individual, what if they were married? They were a married couple, possibly under the age of 40, and they may have a child. What would your advice be?
I'll probably be adding another bedroom to it, so that it's like a 3-bedroom home that they're doing. Especially in Ghana, most families tend to use a house help or like a support staff. And so maybe in that case, I'll also be adding that there's a caretaker or a house help's quarters attached to this 3-bedroom home. We'll possibly maybe looking at a budget more like around $80,000–$90,000 to do a project like that. Yeah.
What are the top 3 mistakes or things that people do not consider when they decide to build?
A lot of the times people are not fully understanding of actually even the design that the architect may have given to them. I'd suggest that as much as possible that you get graphic presentations or drawings that shows you pictorially what you're about to go construct. These days most architects will do that, but yet still there's also the shortcoming of a good understanding of spaces or the sizes of the rooms. And most people have started their construction only to be either overwhelmed with the size of the building they are undertaking or disappointed by the smallness of the space. It will be good that you let your architect take you through as much as possible, that you understand what are the sizes of the rooms that you're about to build. I also think that most people do not fully understand how much the project is going to cost. And this has led to so many uncompleted projects we see around our cities and towns. It will be good that we know exactly how much it's going to cost and possibly have planned how we're going to raise the funds to do this project. A lot of times people could be very careful with their architects and design work, but then they may not carry out the same diligence with the choice of a contractor or builder. It will be good that you use the same diligence to make that choice, and good contractual arrangements made for that purpose, because a lot of times those things end in chaos and litigations, because what may have been anticipated as a cost at the commencement of a project do change a lot.
Can you give us an example of one of your clients that may have come across some of these issues or mistakes that they've made, and were they able to resolve it, or were you able to resolve it?
I've had a client who kept saying, I like a big master bedroom, I like a big master bedroom, and then he says, I like a big kitchen. And so we did that for them. We tried to show them with spaces around the office what kind of size we're providing for them, and we had their okay on it. But on site, once the project actually started, I mean, he was overwhelmed with the size of the building and then kept saying, I didn't ask for that. And in its reduction as well, it kind of just distorted the entire design. and some things had to be broken and things like that. So it is quite a problem. If it's avoided, it's best for everybody. The other common one I spoke about was the issue to do with the builder and then the contractual arrangements prior to commencement. So we have an economy which, say, through the end of the year to the beginning of the year, prices would go through such significant increases. So say you get your quotation for your building in November and you start your construction. Suddenly in January, iron rods prices has gone up, cement prices gone up, and we do a lot of things so informally. So the contractor or builder comes back and then there's such an astronomical rise in your original quote or price, and it often can create such tensions and stall the project because there's so much distrust. Are you being cheated? Is this genuine? Do you go onto the market to verify that the cement prices and iron rods prices have gone up? These are real things that if people could do better at the commencement of their projects, these mistakes will be avoided.
How do we currently build in Ghana in a way that accommodates our climate and environment? And then in the same vein, how should we be building in Ghana and Africa regarding this?
Okay, today what we tend to do with our buildings is that many of us are more, or many of my clients are more interested in the aesthetics of the building, and not many are so sensitive to the climate and the environment in discussing their briefs with their architects. So we tend to have quite a number of buildings that are not so responsive to the climate, and there are things that maybe look so beautiful but they're not exactly most comfortable to live in. They could be buildings that could be anywhere in the world but are not so truly meant for our Ghanaian climate and environment. I would say that these have been maybe partly client ignorance, but also as an architect I've noted that our industries are very lacking in innovation in how to use local materials in today's world, how to take local materials and refine them to the point that it becomes appealing to be deployed in our buildings. This is what societies or countries elsewhere, more developed countries, have done, and we see them use their forests, use their stones, in a way that is industrialized, and they use them on their buildings. And what we tend to do in Ghana is, in the absence of similar industries, we tend to import these materials from elsewhere to use them on our buildings. Going forward, I would want to see that if we had industries come in, get interested in construction, so take our local stones, for example, and then find a way to bring them up to a point where we can use them on our buildings. Many years ago, I was doing a project that I tried to use stones from Ibri on parts of a building. At the end of the project, I found out that the most expensive tiles that I'd imported from Spain was actually cheaper than the raw stones that I'd used from the mountains just close by. But it speaks to the fact that these haven't been industrially worked on in such ways that it's easy to take them in such sizes and then put them on buildings. So, and then we are aware that like louver blades will give us our better ventilation, but it hasn't been so developed here locally. So we all tend to use sliding windows. Aesthetically, it looks beautiful, but these are probably more suited to temperate climates than to tropical environments here. But because our industries haven't necessarily come up with how we're going to use them with the technology, how to remote control louvers, Where do you put your netting and things when you're using louvers in a way that it does not pick dust? I think that there's so much more we can do with materials given the kind of environment we're in, but we're really much behind on that. Yeah.
I understand that in South Africa they have good technology when it comes to like louver blades and things like that. Is that the case?
I understand the same as well. I've actually seen a few things as well from the China market that is meant to address some of these things, but it will be good for our climate. We need these kind of innovations here. And if we could have industrialists locally here take up some of these things and develop them, we would have solutions local. Yeah.
Can you tell us whether you've had an experience on a client being insistent on using a particular material or technology that you think as an architect isn't suitable for the building that they're trying to build? How do you go about ironing out any contention that may come across that way?
As an architect, though, I've come to the understanding many years ago that there is the dimension of choice, of personality in what I do. And though a client hires me as their architect, I have a great respect for a client's personal choice. So for me, many times I've done projects or designs that, if you ask me, may not be my way of doing it if I had the freedom to, but I recognize that it's not going to be my home. It's this person's home, and that tastes are not just objective, it may be subjective. If, however, the request is something I consider to be ethically wrong, I would insist on it. And if it means that I need to part company with the clients, I've done so on some projects before, not many. But it is a call to be accommodating when you're an architect. People have lived in homes. There are things they are used to. A client who's lived in a home all their lives in London maybe wants some brick here, wants that there. You need to be sensitive to those things and then make them provisions for them. They are not necessarily, if you agree to them, it doesn't destroy the building, it doesn't put their health at any risks. So such things about finishes, I may defer to a client's preference, but if it is structural and to their detriment and things like that, I would insist. And if we cannot agree, I would not mind to let go of that.
SM, can you explain what are some of the challenges you face as an architect and how they are normally resolved?
The issue of fees is something that a lot of architects will bring out as one of our major problems. I see that we deal with clientele who often think that the work we do is actually very simple. And so their expectations of what should be their fee is often not the same as we see. So we've often had well-meaning clients genuinely unhappy or not ready to pay our fees, and it can be quite disturbing. The work that we do, it's something that is creative, and if you're well motivated, your creative juices flows even the more. So that's one challenge a lot of architects will cite, that of remuneration. Another challenge has often been that there's so much of the angle of a client's personal choice. So you could do a design for a client that all the graphics you've provided at the initial stages are beautiful and acceptable by the client. They go to site to actually do the construction, and then they suddenly say, I don't think we can afford windows or glass in all of this space here. We're going to put block work here. I don't think we can afford marble on this surface here. Why don't we just paint it and things like that? And it is your design being torn apart, but that is what the client can afford. That is what they want to do, and you can't stop them. And do you suddenly say then that you don't own the design anymore, or do you still carry on with that kind of project? So these are some of the challenges we've had. Or sometimes you've come up with very beautiful drawings, but the client has engaged a contractor that is not so good. And so you can see your design, you're supervising them, but you can see your design not being executed to the perfection that you want them. And it gets distorted. It's no more what you created, but you're not the builder. And it can be pretty frustrating.
How difficult is it not to take these things personally? Because you pour your creative juices, into design and flow. How difficult can it be when you see, as you said, your designs being morphed into something that you hadn't envisaged?
It is challenging. It is heartbreaking. My experiences in that regards have been in two extremes. So I recall a project that I'd designed for some clients, and it was supposed to be a block of apartments, and it was 5-story. And I was so in love with the look of the building, and I couldn't wait for it to be constructed. And just about when we were about to go onto site, the client had come up with some analysis of the viability of the project and the fact that possibly he needs to make it a 10-story so that they will be able to meet the returns of investment expected. And to me, changing that scale to a 10-story was suddenly not as beautiful as what I had designed and envisaged. And I remember closing from work that day very disappointed. I mean, today that building has been constructed, and I must say that it came out looking very beautiful. So sometimes the thing is that because we've dreamt it and seen it and want it that way, our minds can be a bit blocked when the client is coming up with revisions to it. But it may not always mean that it's a distortion. It possibly could mean an enhancement. Then, of course, I've had the experience as well in the other extreme where the client's changes and requests and on-site revisions have distorted the building to the point where I did not want to own it anymore. I've had such a client who called me one day, so I'm into a site, a project I designed for them, and he was so excited with how it's come out to be. I mean, they had not engaged my service in their supervision. So I get to the project site, and then they had used all kinds of features there, which is really not my design ethos. And he was beaming and saying how everybody loves the building, and I was so unhappy.
You were crying inside.
But I remember coming back home and saying that, well, I did it for him, and if he loves how it's looking like, I probably should just let him be happy. And stay that way. I've never quite referred to that project to people and said that that's my work, though.
I was about to ask you, like, have you claimed that as an SM Quartey or Atelier? Okay. How can we embrace a more Afro-centered building philosophy?
98% of the projects I do are not initiated by myself. They are client requested, and many people's definition of beauty and what they consider exciting, what they consider trendy, is so greatly externally influenced. So I see that in responding to them as an architect, it's often been a challenge to get them looking in the direction of Afro-centered philosophies. But we cannot continue to design this way. I think in a response to your question, I think that for us architects, for us locals, for us Africans, some of us will have to be like ambassadors. When we have an opportunity to be our own clients or be the initiators of projects, we must push this whole Afrocentric philosophy into our projects. A lot of people love what they see done. So when they see these things done, they're going to start to say, okay, why don't you do similar for me? Why don't you put, but it is time we started to look in this direction. But it's a real challenge. The people we design for, many of them's definition of beauty, they will not accept it, but it's so externally influenced. And then you recall the conversation about materials itself, which are all mainly imported as well. And until we start to do things from locally here, develop our raffia, our mangrove, our bamboo, our timber and things like that into our stone, into very exciting materials that people would love to use on their buildings, we would continue to depend so much externally. And then also maybe we do this from school, but understanding also our culture and the history, then we'll be able to bring in elements and things from that past into today's buildings and tomorrow's buildings. And then possibly another conversation 20 years from now would be flooded by more afrocentric buildings in our environment. But I know today, though, we are far behind in this direction.
And I think, as you had mentioned, that the cost of local materials, they are so expensive.
Yes.
So
Shocking.
I think, aesthetically, I think a lot of people would be interested in, utilizing such materials for their offices or homes. But the cost, I think, really does put off a lot of people.
It's not only the cost, but if it's not been industrially processed, I mean, for example, our grass and touch is beautiful, but people have used the touch and in the shortest of times it's decaying and things like that. So, but if they were properly industrially processed, it would be fit for the environment. It will have guarantees of 15 years or 25 years and things that, I mean, these stones, if they were processed industrially, they would come out in modules, in sizes, like the way the tiles come in, the sizes that they come in, etc. And it becomes easier to use, right? So it's a call to industrialists to start to get into our materials, local materials, more research, and then let's see what we can come up with. Maybe we can become a source of exports of some of these materials ourselves as well.
Can you speak a little bit more to your point you made regarding our culture as Ghanaian stroke Africans, that our culture and our families, how that should be incorporated into the living spaces in which we are building? Are you able to speak to that a little bit more?
Many families today in Ghana here do not even speak the local language with the children. The children cannot even comprehend it. And we've embraced westernization in all aspects of our lives, in what we wear, in what we eat, in the language we speak. Then also possibly the challenge is that we have just too many fragmented cultures all around us. So it's become difficult to even define what is Ghanaian. Is it Dagomba? That's very different from Ashanti. Is it Gadangwe? It's very different from Fanti. Is it Ewe? So I think that the whole fragmentization of our whole cultures and things makes it difficult to forge a one agenda or one culture thing. I'm sad about this, but this is something about the trend that we find ourselves in. What we try to do, though, is that we recognize that as Ghanaians generally, and this is before the COVID outbreak, we're pushing the agenda that we shake hands too often. It's part of our life. We meet everybody, you shake their hands. And so we've been thinking that our designs of homes ought to have, say, immediately you enter a home, a first point of call of a wash hand basin. I mean, the Japanese, because they will sit on the floors and things like that, they have a point at the entry of a home for you to put your shoes and things like that. But we, because we shake hands, we probably need to have wash hand basins as part of our designs. Every Ghanaian home you enter, right at the entrance, is a place that you wash your hands before you even start to interact with the hosts and things like that. And then we tend to do all of these cooking that we need, like what we call an African kitchen or an outdoor kitchen area. So that too is a feature that literally all our homes would have those things. Bits of these things we can call them as typically Ghanaian or African to have in our homes, but on many other fronts we've become one with a certain international drive. So a living room in Ghana may not look any different from a living room in the United States, and a bedroom in Ghana may not look, but some of these areas, if we added the ones I spoke about, those could make some distinction and be our response to our culture or our ways of living. Yeah.
Architects sometimes design beautiful houses, yet they never become homes because they seem like they are to be looked at and never lived in. How can we address this?
As an architect, I've often made a philosophy that I like to design for people that I've met or spoken to directly. So I do not like designing for a client who we have a third person or a middle person who picks instructions and brief and then comes to tell me, because I think you miss something when you're not talking to the user or end user directly. In that conversation, you get some unspoken things that you can put in your design, and when the design is being completed, you see that this is this person's home because you understood the person. There are things about their personality that they may not actually say it as a brief, but as an architect we are trained to be able to sense these things, and then you make the design provisions for them. So that is one part, that our designs must be things that reflects the user's personalities. But on another front, the user themselves as well will have to own the space. Because say if I design apartments or a building that was speculative without the owner known at the design stage, if you moved into that building, you need to, it may be a beautiful building from the outside, as we said, but you'd have to put in things that makes it your home, that you own it, that you stamp your identity on that space. So people walk in and say, I see you here. It may be pictures that you put there. It may be colors that people know are easily identified with you that you use there. It may be your style of minimalist stick furnishing, it may be, but people as well have a duty, the users of a building have a duty to bring in their identity into the spaces that we create for them. And this would then complete the discussion about being a home. So there is a part, as I said, that is the architect's role to play, but there will be the part of the end users to play to make it their home.
What do women bring to architecture that men might not be able to?
As an architect, I've sat in class with women. I've often been amazed about something I call like an extra sensitivity to a client's brief. I mean, they sometimes sense things that the male architect is looking at a broader picture and may not immediately realize it. There are some specific projects, like not too long ago we were working on a creche, and the first project on a creche or nursery school was I'd put a male architect on it. It turned out to be a beautiful design, but it was until another similar project, and this time I used a lady architect, and the depth to which she was looking at the spaces and where the children would run and sit and eat and things, I realized that there was an angle that we possibly may have missed in the first design or the earlier client. But on a general level though, I think that increasingly female architects are just matching male architects. I will not say that there is much of a difference. When you have a sharp female architect, it's just as good as your male architect. On a general level, I mean, they will give you all the same thing as a male architect. So I wouldn't make much distinction that they bring on some, but on certain project specific, where there is some sensitivity to children and things like that, I think that the lady architect innately has a better understanding than the male architects. Yeah.
Thank you. In Ghana, mortgages are quite high. How are individuals able to build their own homes?
People here are often of the mindset that they earn money and then they put it into their construction. So most people fund projects directly from their businesses or their income and hardly resort to mortgage houses. I think it's a call not on the architect, but it's a call on these mortgage houses to make their products that popular that people would resort to them to finance their construction projects. I think the biggest challenge they would have is the huge informal sector here, because most mortgages are tailored to address blue-collar jobs and your pay slips and your full-time employment and things like that. But in Ghana, I mean, a lot of people beside their full-time employment have all kinds of side businesses, not so properly registered, incomes not so well structured. I mean, I've seen people who have wondered how they're going to finance their buildings, and then if it takes them 10 years, they still will. You go and see a building they've done, which is easily $150,000, and then you ask, how was it done? You know, but will the mortgage houses have products that address this unusual clientele? In our markets, Makala, Bosokai, Ashama market, there are people who make money every day. They don't have formal accounts or ways that they can meet their requests by these mortgage houses, but they are potential clients that they ought to think how they're going to engage them and help them do their projects. So that is a challenge that mortgage houses will have to find solutions to.
Finally, what is your advice to young architects?
It is a beautiful time to be a Ghanaian architect. Time and again, when I've traveled to other very popular cities around the world, I hardly see any empty spaces. Whole stretch of land is all built. I look around Accra, Tema, our cities, Kumasi, our towns, and it's as if we have not yet built our cities and towns. So if you're a young architect, I'll say that good times are now coming. So much more to do. We don't even have yet the buildings that define our cities. We know today, if you see a certain picture, you know that this is Sydney. You see a picture, you know that this is New York, this is San Francisco. I mean, what defines or what says this is Accra or this is Cape Coast? So all of these towns and cities have not yet been built in the way that it should be. It's exciting for the young architects. We've been enjoying. When I was growing, we didn't know stability in our government and things like that. It was a thing to commonly hear of a coup and things, and these things do not help investors. But for the last couple of decades, we have had this kind of stability, and I pray it continues. It brings development, and it brings business for architects. So I would say that good times are coming. It's going to be challenging though, because for the young Ghanaian architect, you're going to have a lot of competition. 20 years ago, we used to go out to other countries to go and compete with them there as architects. Today, architects from all over the world are coming to Ghana and other African countries to come and practice here. So the competition is being brought to our door. So the Ghanaian architect, yes, good times are coming, but we ought to up our game. We ought to be able to show our designs that we understand our turf. And it makes people think that it's better to use the Ghanaian architects because the competition is real. People are coming in and working here. As well, there's going to be a lot of Ghanaian architects who, Ghanaian by birth, but maybe not have trained here, who are desirous of coming home. And it's going to be very competitive. It's going to be very competitive, but I think that calls for excellence. And our cities and our people will be the winners if excellence becomes the requirement. Yeah.
Can you tell me some of the architects that you personally admire or those that you looked up to? But why did you become an architect yourself?
As a little boy, I loved to draw. And so it was just a passion of mine. And as I grew up, I got to understand that architecture is a direction that I could channel this passion into. So I had kind of an interesting blend of passion to draw, and then I was also a science-biased person. So it led me to architecture, and I'm glad that I'm here. My dad was always telling me to be a doctor, but I didn't think I was cut out for that, and I'm happy that I chose to go in this direction. One of the architects is an Australian architect. I remember reading his books and I was very excited. It's called Harry Seidler. And I love the way he worked curves into his design. And at the time I completed school, I realized that we have an environment or a cityscape that is very scanty in curved linear forms. And so I sought to go in that direction. And it brought me quick identification and an image. Though, I mean, today I don't think so many of my designs are necessarily curvilinear, but I loved that Harry Seidler's work. Locally, I was given a lot of tuition by the bosses that I worked for. There's an architect called Architect Hayford, Kwaku Hayford. I worked at his place when I came out of school. I loved his attitude to simplicity, and I understood that simplicity in architecture means timelessness. Then I worked for a company called Dewega, Grutter, Brown and Partners. They were probably most reputable architectural firm in the country then. And my bosses took particular interest in me to help me to develop me further. Architect Brown and then a Swiss architect called Grutter. There are different styles. Mr. Grutter's passion for detail was something that I learned a lot from. And then Mr. Brown combined good understanding of contract administration. And then, I mean, his personality itself, I think that exuded a lot of confidence, and clients usually want to deal with somebody that they feel you are confident about your work, because the things that we do, the buildings, the products, it lives and outlives us. They are people's biggest investments, and people want to employ or take the services of somebody who seems confident about what they do. So, I mean, these are names that greatly influenced my profession today, and I'm forever thankful to them.